In this recording, we'll talk about tissues. So you remember in the hierarchy, we said that you start with chemicals and make up cells, and the group of cells come together for common function, and they form tissues. So that's what we're talking about. So in the complex organisms like us, we do organize the hierarchy of cells into tissues. And a tissue, so is a group of similar cells with a common function. The study of the tissues is called histology. I'm sure you've heard of that before. There's four major types of tissues in the body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Okay, so epithelial, this is for protection, secretion, absorption, excretion, often covers body surfaces, whether it's outer areas or internal organs, and also composes glands. Okay, they don't have blood vessels. The cells divide very quickly, and cells are tightly packed. Okay, next is connective tissue. They bind, support, protect, fill spaces, store fat, produce blood cells. They're found everywhere in the body, and most of them do have good blood supply. Cells do tend to be farther apart than epithelial cells and have what's called extracellular matrix. Okay, next, muscle. It's for movement, attached to bones. It's in the walls of hollow internal organs and the heart. And muscle cells are able to contract in response to specific stimuli. Okay, then there's nervous tissue. Conducts impulses for coordination, regulation, integration, and sensory reception. We find this in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. And cells communicate with each other and other body parts. Now, within the tissues, often you may find different connectors or intercellular junctions. Tight junctions are close space between cells by fusing cell membranes. And the cells that line the small intestine are a good example of areas that have tight junctions. Okay, desmosomes, they bind cells by forming spot welds between the cell membranes. And cells of the outer skin layer are an example. Then there's gap junctions. They form tubular channels between the cells that allow exchange of substances. Muscle cells of the heart and digestive tract are good examples. Okay, and this is images of those different types. Here we have a tight junction, here the desmosome, and here a gap junction. Okay, from science to technology. So nanotechnology meets the blood-brain barrier. In nanotechnology, we do things that help with drug delivery across the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier selects which chemicals are going to be allowed to cross. It protects us from toxins and chemical fluctuations. In nanotechnology, we use structures smaller than 100 nanometers in at least one direction to help medications cross the blood-brain barrier. Example, anesthetics or chemotherapeutics. They're combined with liposomes, which are phospholipid bubbles, to mask portions of the drug that cannot cross the barrier. An example, insulin. This can be inhaled in nanoparticles now instead of being injected. Okay, we'll start with epithelial tissues. So first of all, generally they cover organs and body surfaces. They line cavities and hollow organs. They make up glands. They have a free surface on the outside and a basement membrane on the inside. They lack blood vessels, so we say they're avascular. And nutrients diffuse to the epithelial tissues from underlying connective tissues. These cells readily divide, so injuries heal rapidly. The cells tend to be tightly packed, and they're classified according to the cell shape and number of cell layers. For example, squamous are flat, cuboidal or cube-shaped, and columnar or tall. We'll also use other terms to indicate layers. Simple means one layer, stratified means two or more layers, and then there's pseudostratified, which means it looks like it's layered, but it's not really. Okay, first of all, simple squamous epithelium. It's a single layer of thin, flat cells. Substances pass easily through the air sacs or alveoli and capillaries with these cells. They're thin and delicate. They can be easily damaged, though. They're found in diffusion and filtration sites. They make up walls of air sacs, which we call alveoli in the lungs, and capillaries. They line the blood and lymphatic vessels also. Simple cuboidal epithelium. This is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. They're responsible for secretion and absorption. They line the kidney tubules, the thyroid follicles, and the ducts of some glands. And they cover the ovaries. Okay, here it shows some of the simple squamous, as you can see, flattened cells. And here we see the cuboidal cells. And often you'll see a simple cuboidal cell tissue surrounding a lumen or an opening because you're looking at a tube that has been cut across. Okay, simple columnar epithelium. This is a single layer of elongated cells. The nuclei are usually at the same level near the basement membrane. Sometimes they have microvilli or cilia or goblet cells that secrete mucus. They're responsible for secretion and absorption. They line the uterus, the stomach, and the intestines. And then we have pseudostratified columnar epithelium. It's a single layer, but it looks like it's layered. And often what's happening is certain cells are being pinched in at the top or bottom. It has nuclei at 2 or more levels. The cells vary in shape, but all reach the basement membrane. They often have cilia or goblet cells, and they provide protection from infection. They line the respiratory passageways as well. Okay, here you can see the columnar cells. So this is simple columnar. And often you'll see it surrounding certain tissues like the microvilli of the intestines. Okay, this shows pseudostratified columnar. Again, it looks like it may be more than one level of the cells, but actually it's just the nuclei are at different levels and the cells are being pinched in. Okay, notice we do have cilia here. So this is ciliated pseudostratified columnar, which you would find at the trachea going down to the lungs. They sweep mucus upward and capture particles. Stratified squamous epithelium. So you have many cell layers. This tends to be thick. Again, they're flattened. It's a protective layer. It's the outermost cells tending to be squamous, and the deeper cells will actually be a little cuboidal, so not all of it looks flattened. New cells are produced in the deeper layers, and they push older cells towards the free surface. The outer layer of skin, called the epidermis, tends to be keratinized. Okay, that means it has keratin. It lines the oral cavity, vagina, and the anal canal. In those cases, it is not keratinized, only the outer layer of skin. Stratified cuboidal epithelium. Here we have 2 to 3 layers of cube-shaped cells. It gives more protection than one layer. It lines the ducts of the mammary, sweat, and salivary glands, and the pancreas. Okay, here on the left, we see stratified squamous. And on the right, we see stratified cuboidal. Okay, stratified columnar epithelium. Here we have several layers of cells. It has a top layer of elongated cells, and then cube-shaped cells in the deeper layers. It lines part of the male urethra and the ducts of the exocrine glands. And then we have transitional epithelium, also called uroepithelium. It has many cell layers. They're cube-shaped and elongated. They change shape and appearance with increased tension when they stretch. It forms a barrier and lining that can expand, and therefore you see this in the urinary bladder and the ureters in part of the urethra. Okay, on the left, you see the stratified columnar, and on the right is the transitional. Okay, and this is a good table to get to know, table 5.3, that goes through each of these types of epithelial tissues with a description, a function, and a location. Okay, now sometimes we talk about glandular epithelium, and that means the epithelium that composes the cells that produce and secrete substances, so the glands. And there's two types of glands in the body. The endocrine glands secrete into tissue fluid or blood. Exocrine glands secrete into ducts that open onto a surface. There's two structural types of exocrine glands: unicellular, which are composed of one cell, such as a goblet cell. These secrete mucus. And then multicellular exocrine glands. They're composed of many cells, and they can be simple or compound. Examples are sweat and salivary glands. Okay, also, we can categorize the exocrine glands by their structural types. Simple means the duct does not branch. Compound means that a duct branches before it reaches the secretory portion. Tubular means it consists of epithelial-lined tubes. Alveolar means it has a terminal portion that forms sac-like dilations. Okay, the types of glandular secretions you see. Merocrine glands, these secrete fluid products by exocytosis, so salivary and sweat glands, and the pancreas. The apocrine glands, they actually lose small parts of the cell itself during secretion, like the mammary and ceremonous glands. And then holocrine glands that release the entire cell parts filled with product, like the sebaceous glands. Figure 5.12 shows you the different types of exocrine glands. Okay, table 5.4 is a table that shows the types of exocrine glands, and you may want to look at this in studying for the next exam. This shows the different types of exocrine glandular secretions. Here we have the merocrine, here's the apocrine, and here's the holocrine. Remember, merocrine actually releases secretions or chemicals. Apocrine glands release parts of the cell, and holocrine glands release the entire cells. Okay, next, connective tissues. Some of the general characteristics: they're the most abundant tissue type by weight in your body. Cells tend to be farther apart than epithelial cells. They contain abundant extracellular matrix between the cells that consist of protein fibers and what we call a ground substance. The consistency varies from fluid to solid depending on what type of connective tissue. The categories of connective tissues include connective tissue proper and specialized connective tissues. Most have good blood supply, so they're well nourished, and most cells have the ability to divide. They contain fixed cells, which remain in one place, and also wandering cells like macrophages, which move throughout the tissues. Functions of the connective tissues include binding structures together, providing support and protection, serving as a framework, filling spaces, storing fat, producing blood cells, protecting against infections, and helping repair tissue damage. So as you can see, connective tissue has various types of functions. Okay, clinical application: the body's glue, the extracellular matrix. Functions of the normal extracellular matrix include scaffolding that organizes and anchors cells into tissues. It relays chemical signals that control cell division and differentiation, and tissue repair and cell migration. Okay, in some cases, in a cancer, we can convert fibroblasts into myofibroblasts, which take on characteristics of cancer cells. Also loosens the fibroblast connections, which allows migration of the converted fibroblasts and spreading of cancer. Okay, in liver fibrosis, collagen deposition increases and extracellular matrix now exceeds its normal 3% of the organ. Damaging agents will evoke normal inflammatory responses, but if it continues too long, it can block connection between the liver cells and the blood and could lead to cirrhosis. In heart failure and atherosclerosis, some forms involve excess collagen deposition, which can stiffen the heart or block blood flow. Okay, different types of cells that we see in connective tissue. The most common type of cell is a fixed cell, which is a fibroblast. They're large star-shaped cells, and they secrete fibers into the extracellular matrix. Next, we have macrophages or histiocytes. They're usually attached to fibers, but they can detach and wander. They conduct phagocytosis, and they defend against infection. And then we have mast cells. They're large cells that are widely distributed. And they release heparin to prevent blood clotting. And they release histamine, which causes an inflammatory response. And this shows the different types of cells. Okay, let's talk about the connective tissue fibers you might see. Fibroblasts produce three types of fibers in the connective tissues. Collagen fibers. They're thick threads of collagen, and it's the body's main structural protein. It has great tensile strength and flexibility, and they're slightly elastic. They're found in the ligaments and tendons. Then we have elastic or yellow fibers. They're composed of elastin protein, which branches. It can stretch and return to original shape. It's not as strong as collagen fibers, and we see these in the vocal cords and respiratory air passages. Reticular fibers, they tend to be thinner, but they're branching fibers of collagen. They form delicate supporting networks, and these tend to be found in the spleen and the liver. And because they're thin, they tend to be easily damaged. In this picture, you see collagen fibers and elastic fibers shown with an electron microscope. Table 5.6 shows you the components of the connective tissue. Connective tissue can be classified into two major categories: connective tissue proper or specialized connective tissue. Connective tissue proper can be separated into loose connective tissues or dense connective. In loose connective tissues, you have fewer collagen fibers than dense, and the types include areolar, adipose, and reticular. With dense connective tissue, you have abundant collagen fibers, and the types include dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. And specialized connective tissues include cartilage, bone, and blood. Now, sometimes there can be abnormalities in collagen. Collagen makes up greater than 60% of the protein in bone and cartilage, and a large percentage of dry weight of skin, tendons, and ligaments. It has a very precise structure, and it's vulnerable to disruption. Some examples: chondrodysplasia. Collagen chains are asymmetric and too wide in this case, which causes stunted growth and deformed joints. And Marfan syndrome. This is a deficiency of the protein fibrillin and leads to long limbs, spindly fingers, sunken chest, weak aorta, dislocation of the lens of the eye. Looking more specifically at some of these connective tissues. Areolar connective tissue forms thin, delicate membranes. The cells are mainly fibroblasts, which are in a gel-like ground substance. They have collagenous and elastic fibers. They're in subcutaneous layers, and they're beneath most epithelia, where it nourishes nearby epithelial cells. Next, adipose tissue, or what you know as fat. The cells are adipocytes, and these store the fat. They push their nuclei to one side. They crowd out other cell types, and they're used for cushioning and insulation. You'll find them beneath the skin in the subcutaneous layers, behind the eyeballs, around the heart and kidneys, and in spaces between the muscles. And on the left here, you'll see the areolar connective tissue, and on the right, the adipose tissue. Notice the adipose tissue looks like bubbles, but you do see the nuclei pushed to the side of the cells. Okay, reticular connective tissue. It's composed of a network of thin reticular fibers. It supports walls of internal organs, like the liver and the spleen. Dense regular connective tissue. This has closely packed collagenous fibers, has a fine network of elastic fibers, and mostly the cells are fibroblasts. It's very strong and withstands pulling. It binds body parts together, like the tendons, ligaments, and the dermis. It does have a poor blood supply, so tends to heal slowly. At the top, you see reticular fibers or reticular connective tissue, and at the bottom, dense regular connective tissue. Okay, dense irregular connective tissue. It's randomly organized, thick, and interwoven collagenous fibers. It can withstand tension exerted from different directions. It's found in the dermis of the skin, also around the skeletal muscles. Elastic connective tissue. It's an abundant yellow elastic fiber type, and some collagenous fibers are found. It contains fibroblasts. The attachments are between bones of spinal columns, and the walls of the hollow organs contain it, like large arteries and airways. It's also found in parts of the heart. It has an elastic quality, and it stretches. At the top, we see dense irregular tissue, and at the bottom, elastic connective tissue. Okay, it's the specialized connective tissues, so cartilage, bone, and blood. Each contains a unique matrix with specialized cells. In cartilage, we have a rigid, specialized connective tissue. It supports, it's a framework, it also serves as attachments. It protects the underlying tissue. It also originally forms a model for developing bones. The matrix contains collagen and gel-like ground substance. Chondrocytes, which are cartilage cells, are found in lacunae or chambers that are surrounded by matrix. Therefore, cartilage often has these holes in it, or they look like holes. They lack blood supply, so it does not heal quickly. Cartilage is covered by perichondrium, which is a connective tissue, and this provides some nutrients to the cartilage. There's three types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most common type. It has very fine collagen fibers in the matrix. We find hyaline cartilage at the ends of your bones, in the joints, in your nose, your respiratory passages, and the embryonic skeleton is hyaline cartilage. Elastic cartilage. This is flexible due to elastic fibers in the matrix. Examples: the external ear and the larynx. And then fibrocartilage. Very tough due to many collagen fibers. It's a shock absorber. We find this in the intervertebral discs, and also the pads or menisci of the knee and the pelvic girdle. At the top, we see the hyaline cartilage, and at the bottom, we see the elastic. Notice that you don't really see the fibers very well in hyaline cartilage. It's much smoother. In the elastic, you do see the fibers. Again, in both, notice you see the chondrocytes, which are shown in lacunae. Here we have fibrocartilage. And notice the fibers aren't as distinct, they're just smoother. Okay, bone or osseous tissue. This is the most rigid connective tissue. It has a solid matrix that is composed of a mineral, calcium, in the form of salts, and collagen. It supports the other structures. It protects vital organs. It produces blood cells, and it stores and releases calcium and phosphorus. It's an attachment site for muscles, forms your skeleton, of course, and contains osteocytes, which are bone cells. And they're found in lacunae also, like the chondrocytes, although it looks a little different. There's two types of bone tissue: compact and spongy. Compact bone. The osteoblasts deposit matrix in lamellae, or layers, and they occur in rings around a central canal. Looks kind of like tree rings. The osteocytes plus the matrix plus the central canal form a cylindrical unit we call an osteon. Osteocytes send out processes into canaliculæ and share the blood supply. Osteons are cemented together to form compact bones. Central canals contain the blood vessels, and the bone is well nourished and heals more quickly than cartilage. Spongy bone. This makes up the interior part of bone. It consists of bony plates containing osteocytes with space between them for marrow. It's lighter in weight than compact bone. And this shows you the compact bone. Notice how it is arranged in these concentric layers or lamellae with a central canal, and the osteon are each of these large ring structures. Okay, next, blood. Formed elements, cells and fragments suspended in fluid matrix called plasma. And there's different types of formed elements. The red blood cells transport gases. They're also called erythrocytes. White blood cells defend against infection. They're also called leukocytes. And then we have platelets that help in blood clotting. Blood transports substances around the body. Here you see red blood cells, or erythrocytes. And occasionally you'll see a larger cell in the middle of the red blood cells, which are the white blood cells. Also, you see the much smaller fragments between the cells, which are the platelets. Okay, table 5.7 summarizes the different connective tissues and gives you the functions and locations. This would be a good one to study. All right, membranes. Membranes are sheets of cells. Epithelial membranes are composed of epithelial and connective tissue. They cover body surfaces and line cavities. And there's three types of epithelial membranes. First of all, the serous membranes, which we've already talked about in another chapter. They line the body cavities that do not open to the outside of the body. The inner linings of the thorax and abdomen, for example, and they cover the organs. They are composed of simple squamous epithelium and areolar connective tissue. They secrete serous fluid for lubrication and reducing friction. Next, mucous membranes. They line the cavities and tubes that open to the outside of the body. The lining of the digestive system, respiratory, urinary, and reproductive tracts. They're composed of epithelium and areolar connective tissue. And they have goblet cells that secrete mucus. Okay, cutaneous membranes. They cover body surfaces, commonly called skin. So it's part of the integumentary system. And then we have the synovial membranes. They're different from epithelial membranes. They're composed entirely of connective tissue, and they line the joint cavities. Okay, next, muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is excitable. That means it responds to nervous stimulation. And muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. They're contractile, so they can shorten and thicken. And there's three types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle tissue is attached to bone. It's striated, it's voluntary, and we generally have long cylindrical multinucleated cells, and they can be stimulated by nerve cells. When we say striated, you see these little lines that cross the cells. And these cells are very long and they're multinucleated. So you'll see more than one nucleus in each of those long fibers or cells. Okay, so a fiber in muscle is a cell. Smooth muscle tissue, they're not striated. They have spindle-shaped fibers. You find these in the walls of hollow organs and blood vessels, and they're involuntary. And then you have cardiac muscle tissue. It's only in the wall of the heart. They are branching cells. They're involuntary. These are striated. And one way to tell the difference in these and skeletal muscle is you have intercalated discs which are intercellular junctions. At the top, you see the smooth muscle, and you see why we call it that. It is not striated. As it said in the earlier slide, they have spindle-shaped fibers. They only have one nucleus in the cells. And then here at the bottom, we have the cardiac muscle. You see it's branched, and it has these distinct connections between the cells we call intercalated discs. You see that in this picture also, and they are uninucleated. And last, we have nervous tissue. It's found in the brain, the spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. The cells are called neurons. They're the main cells, and they're specialized for communication via conduction of nerve impulses. So sensor reception and motor control are some of the main functions. The neurons coordinate, integrate, and regulate body functions. Neurons are composed of a cell body, which we call a soma, and dendrites, and an axon. And I'll show you this image next. Now you'll also see neuroglia, which are supporting cells that help nourish the neurons. So here's your main neuron, kind of star-shaped. You see it has one long axon coming out, at least this one does, and lots of smaller dendrites. This is the cell body, or the soma, in the middle. Okay, science to technology, building a replacement bladder. Donor organs tend to be in short supply, so tissue engineering has shown promise for organ replacement by growing cells or extracellular matrix from a person's own cells or matrix on a synthetic scaffold. And in this case, if it's done this way, there's no rejection by your immune system. It's already been used to provide skin and cartilage and bone and blood vessels. Urinary bladders are being replaced by growing tissue and donated by the patients. The patient's bladder tissue contains a progenitor cell or groups of progenitor cells for smooth muscle and uroepithelium, which are used to grow a new bladder on a synthetic dome. After an implant, the synthetic scaffold degenerates over time, which leaves the new bladder in place. This table gives you the different types of muscle tissue and nervous tissue with a description, function, and location. And that's the end of the tissues presentation.